Hello, welcome back. My name is Grandmaster Daniel Gormally. Welcome back to my channel, which is called Hometown Chess Hero. And I want to do the final part of my series on Are You a Lucky Player? And the final player I'm going to look at is Brandon Clarke. I'm not sure why I decided to choose Brandon as a subject, but I would say that he's not a lucky player, not a, inverted commas lucky player, in the sense that he doesn't have many turnaround games. I only checked 48 of his games. Doesn't play that much recently. I think going back further, he has played quite a lot, but over the last year he seems to have cut down a bit. But he didn't have many comeback games. I think there's a very clear reason for that, and that is because Brandon is a very well prepared player. Therefore, he is not getting into trouble very often out of the opening. He doesn't have a very risky style. He's got quite a solid style. I'd say it's actually quite similar to my own in some ways. A lot of the focus is on opening preparation. Another player who Brandon I would describe as similar to, but not quite the same, is a very good friend of his, who's Bogdan Lalic. I'm joking, I don't think they get on very well. Okay? But Bogdan is somebody I would describe as being an unlucky player in the sense that he often has very good preparation, but he doesn't do enough with it. He's like the anti-Fernandez in that he's not willing to take risks. If the opening doesn't go well, he'll try and bow out with a draw, which most of the time people will accept because they've got this fear of Bogdan that he's a very solid player. However, Brandon is slightly different. Younger player, he's more progressive. Anyway, I think let's just look at an example. That's not babbling by me. Let's look at an example from one of his games. Playing against a guy called Alan Pichot. I believe might have been from Argentina originally, is now representing Spain. So a lot of chess players end up going to somewhere like Spain. If you live in, say, North America, I know North America now there's more tournaments, so people actually end up in, they end up in North America from Europe, but back in the day it used to be the other way around. If you live in South America, there's probably not many tournaments, right? So you think, well, what's the solution? If you're a professional player, the solution is move to Europe. Represent a nation like Spain where you're going to get paid to play. Now, I could be talking absolute horse, whatever you like to call it, because it could well be that Pichot is from Spain originally. But anyway, let's have a look at the game now. In this position, Black has just taken on G4. White takes back. At this point, how would you evaluate the position? What would you say about the position? So it's very important to be able to evaluate the position. It looks like a position that might have arisen from the Berlin defense. Black has the bishop pair. White is fighting with a knight and bishop against bishop pair. Black has the same structure on the queen side, is very familiar to the Berlin defense. However, this opening was not a Berlin defense. This opening was a Scotch opening, I believe. So Brandon's playing white against a much higher rated player. How would you evaluate the position? Well, if you said that white is in trouble and black is winning, congratulations, because at the moment white is in big trouble. The bishop pair is very strong here. White has this very weak pawn on f3. So at this point in the game, Brandon is in trouble. He doesn't very often get into trouble because, as I said, his opening preparation is very good. However, he does show very good defensive skills here. And I think one of the ways that you need to be good at defending is knowing how to use your knights in a defensive way, which I think Brandon shows it. And also another thing which is very important, to become a lucky player and to be good at, I think the two things are synonymous, which is being a lucky player and also being a good defensive player, is finding a one-line of defense. And I think that's what Brandon does here. So black goes a4, which is maybe not the best move, but still okay. So rook h2, this is all fine. Rook h3. we're fiddling around. Yeah, and I think this was a moment where black should have played, or at some point, black should have played a move c5. So why was c5 a good move? Well, let's think about it. Well, there's really, I think, a very clear reason why c5 is a good move. And that is because you're getting rid of this double pawns on the queen side, which is allowing, so when you've got a bishop pair like this, it's very important to liberate that bishop pair as much as possible. If those bishop pair can operate on full capacity, it's very likely that, you know, for example, if that bishop on f7 was to become active, this whole pawn structure on the king side for white could crumble. If the black bishop was able to take aim at f3, it could be game over. g4 will fall, e4 will fall, and then these black pawns on f4 and g5 will manage to come through, right? So c5 is a very good move here for black. And so, for example, if you take here, I now take with a bishop, well, it looks to me like you're pretty much busted. Where'd you go with the king? You probably go back somewhere like here, right? Well, then a simple move like bishop e3 would be very strong, because you've now threatened to take here and then take on b3, for example. If the king was to step up, I think the same problems. You could play b4 here, but then other problems would start to arise. I mean, for example, black could simply win this pawn on f3 immediately by taking on c1 and going rook f2. It's one option. I mean, the other option is to play b5, which threatens bishop c4 check. So, for example, something like this could happen. Now, here, white does have the option of going bishop e5 or bishop f6. But you are taking on f3 with check, which is quite important. So if you go here, I probably will take. And now I can defend this pawn, and this should be a win. Now, you can go bishop f6 and win the g5. You could have done that previously as well, but yeah, I think this is all generally very bad for white. b5 is very good. I mean, there's other ways to play this position as well. But yeah, it just generally looks very bad. So the other option I think white has is to play, this is probably why black dismisses, he was concerned about this move d5. But then I think you can probably attack that pawn chain again with c6, and that should be good. And if you go knight d3 here, I believe that you can either take on d4, and maybe you can even go c4. Let's have a look at the variations with the engine. So in this position, yeah, I think, for example, here, b5 is very strong. So this is maybe like the simplest way for black to win the game, was to immediately go. So when you're on a defensive, what you don't want to see is your opponent starting to push you back even more and start to play aggressively. Often what you want to see when you're defending is the opponent playing safe, you know, just fiddling around. I mean, it's difficult. You know, there's the danger with that is you feel kind of uncomfortable because they're kind of biding their time. So psychologically you feel uncomfortable. But in a position like this, yeah, black played b5. I mean, it just starts to become very clear that b4 and c5, the activity will just become too much. So if I go b4, well, to start as a2 is simply hanging, but apparently bishop c4, I mean, bishop a2 is winning. The bishop c4 is also... This move is so strong that black can even disregard the a2 pawn. So that can be ruled out. If we take, then bishop c4, very important move. What do you do with a knight, right? You can't move the knight because f1 will drop, so you have to defend it. Then I simply take. Very good for black. Pawn is still weak. How do you defend the pawn? You can't really defend the pawn. If you push it, then I'm going to simply take that. We don't have time for rook a1 because this rook f2 is hanging. And you don't have time to take on h2 and go rook a1 because e2 will hang. Just to show you that variation, here we don't have any time to play rook a1 because e2 is hanging. So b5 is crushing for black and would have, basically capped a well-played game. But in the game, yeah, so this was one possible variation, and then black goes c5, and black is breaking through. We can't keep a lid on black's activity very easily. My analysis is very poor, but essentially we can't disagree with the engine. The engine says start, black is winning. For example, if you went d5, I guess you could consider c6. Another option is bishop f6 to d4. That looks very strong. Let's just, again, as I lack of brain, yep, c6 is the best move here. I wonder about this. Is not quite so good, but still good. But just simply c6. These bishops need to come alive. So up to this point, White had played a very decent game. But b5 would have sealed the deal pretty much. But he started to faff around too much. And I think once White got in knight d3, very important move, suddenly it's not so easy because c5 is now a double-edged sword because you're going to end up with an isolated pawn, right? So it's not so you can play c5, but it's not as effective as it was. So I suspect that, black still felt that, it's probably a misjudgment for black to allow knight d3. He probably felt he was still doing well, which is understandable. It still looks like a good position for black. Black is still slightly better. But you've lost some of the advantage. And Brandon continues to play very good defensive moves in this game. And later on we see actually that, funny enough, incredibly, black ends up not only blowing potential win that he had earlier, but actually getting into trouble. And he probably should, I don't think he necessarily should have bowed out here with a draw. It's understandable to play on, right? Someone like Magnus is going to torture you here. If you're White, Pitchop was White against Magnus, Magnus would torture him. But now we see the drawback of black's position, that g5 is very weak. So the position the whole endgame starts to become a little bit more double-edged. I'm not sure you could take here because there's a bishop a4 check. And when you go to d2, there's rook d1 picking off the knight. He goes knight b2 again. He uses knight very well in his endgame. And he's making it very difficult for black. Black is still trying to win the game. Yeah, and this is where apparently he should have gone bishop b4 check. Was it bishop b? No. Just take. And then check. Very important. That now you bow out and you accept that you haven't, but if you're 26-30, you accept that you haven't won the game. If you're 26-30, it's understandable that he he's quite a big rating difference, so he tries to win the game. But now he ends up in trouble. Knight takes f2 was played. Maybe black was in time trouble at this point. Suddenly black is in big trouble. The bishop pair is still good, but they're not as good. And now probably the killer move here would have just been bishop d6. I think actually Brandon was in time trouble as well in this situation. Bishop d6 was a killer blow because you can't now move the bishop. So if you go bishop d6 here, it's pretty much game over, I think, because you can't move the bishop. You're going to lose your only remaining asset, which is the c5 pawn. You pretty much resign the game. The bishop pair will not survive. So how are you going to make progress here if White just aims to push, say, g5, g6? Probably push the g pawn, right? Because if I push the f pawn, that makes e4 a little bit weak, which might give black a little bit tactical counterplay with moves like king d3. Or maybe I'm going king e3, knight f4, knight e6, and try and snap the pawn off that way. Although that does allow bishop d2, so, maybe I just go knight f4, knight e6 directly. Right? But in any case, how can black make progress? You probably have to play king b3 to c4. It's a very convoluted way, and then move the bishop. By that time, white would have started getting jiggy with a g-pawn. So very, very bad news for black if Brandon had found bishop d6. I often think that's the way that you can often win games, is your opponent's pressing. Psychologically, they're pressing. They're expending a lot of energy, a lot of mental energy trying to win the game. You're defending. If you're a good defender, you can often pick people off later on because they've used up all that energy. And, you know, Karpov used to win a lot of games like that. He would soak up pressure by his opponents and then pick them off later in the game. But actually, sorry, this is what happened. White did go bishop d6. He went knight f4, which was quite a bad move. So I think the best way now was to actually push the pawns. If you push the pawns, you win the game. So Brandon did go bishop d6. It shows how much research I've done for this video, as usual. So how would black respond to that? He probably would have gone king e2, right? And how does it develop? Let's say I go f5, you go here. How do I then win the game? Well, I can go knight f2, but then you go bishop e1, right? I'm looking to win now. I'm not looking for a draw anymore. I'm looking to win. So we could calculate knight f2, bishop e1, bishop c5, bishop f2, bishop f2, bishop e4 draw. Because then I'll take on f5 and you can't win. We've only got one pawn left. I will give up the bishop for the g pawn if I have to. And you won't be able to win the game. So it's clearly not. But then moves like knight f4 come into the equation, right? Maybe idea of king g3 to f4 might be winning. So let's say I went here. Yeah, and if you take, and then I just go here. Maybe not the most accurate. Maybe king g4 is even stronger. But this is good enough. I mean, another option is simply to go f6. And when you take, again, I come up, and now I'm threatening knight f4. Or simply f7. I'm threatening f7. How do you defend? You go here. Now I go here. The game will not last much longer. So Brandon had a very clear chance to win. He soaked up the pressure. But he still got a draw, which was second prize. You know, draw from a bad position, from a lost position against 26-33. But he could have maybe been a bit more ambitious and actually won the game. So in the game he went knight f4. That was quite a bad move, but still very good. The bishop d2, knight d3. This is all winning. But suddenly, you know, at least black now doesn't have to worry about freeing this bishop from the pin on the c-pawn. So now he's all in. He's just got to try and save the game. And this is where white played a very bad mistake. Made a very bad mistake. Went king f5. And the reason that's a bad move is it kind of freezes the e-pawn. Because now you're never threatening. Once you go king f5, you're now no longer threatening to play e5 because of bishop takes f4. So you can't make progress. So how can white win the game? Not an easy question to answer here. Yeah, when you're short of time, I think this is a very tricky position to navigate. I'm not even sure how white can win this. Maybe at home you can see, you know, there's a threat of taking on e4, right? And I make a draw. So how can we win? If you go f5, I take on e4 and I make a draw. I don't even see a win here. Where is the win? I think I've analysed this before and there is a win, but I've now forgotten what it was. Again, shows the level, the depth of preparation I go into putting into these videos. But I think this, by this point, it practically become tricky, right? There is a win here, but it's now become like borderline. Whereas I think earlier white had a very trivial win if he just pushed f4 earlier. So where is the win? You do go f5, so why is this no good? Oh, you take, and then f6 is actually winning. Wow. Yeah, it's easy to miss. This is winning. Because at first sight you think this, but the problem is king h5 and this bishop can't move. Because it can't go to f8, the bishop controls it. And if it goes to c d2 or c1, I just push f7. It's the end of the game. I'm going to make a queen. So your only logical reply is king e6. Now, instead of taking the bishop, I go king g6. So you had to see all this line. Brandon was probably short of time, didn't see this line, made a draw. So instead of that, he played. Sorry, just show you how the game finished. He played king f5. There's no way to win now because you can't. Your piece is effectively frozen. You can't play e5 because that drops f4. Well, you can, but you're still going to be a draw. So he decided to give up on the winning chance, and he just played this and offered a draw. Black can effectively, all black has to do is preserve that bishop, and he won't lose the game because white cannot win with knight and bishop against bishop, king and bishop. White cannot win with king, knight and bishop against king and bishop. He can win with king, knight and bishop against king. If black still has a bishop left, or a knight would also be sufficient, you can't win the game. It's a draw. So he drew that game, but that was a good comeback game, even though he probably should have won it. It was still a good comeback game. So I think that shows that even players like Brandon, who are well prepared, they've got that toughness. I think to be a good player, you have to have that toughness and being hard to beat. Being able to find, you know, lines where only lines, only variations, you know, only moves, I should say, that bring you that defensive skills, and you know you go along those only lines, those only moves, and make a draw. And that's what Brandon showed in that game. It showed a game in a better light, Brandon, where he managed to beat a guy called Oleg Kornev, who's a very seasoned pro. Now, if I look up Oleg Kornev, what is Oleg Kornev's FIDE rating, right? Oleg Kornev was never seriously challenged. Oleg Kornev FIDE, right? FIDE. What is his FIDE rating? He's really gone down. He's 2470, right? And his blitz is 2472. If we go back in the day, right, we go back to, we go all the way back to January 2014, he was 2643. I believe that's the highest rate. No, he's been as high as 2670. You go all the way back to 2006, right? He's been as high as 2670. Which generally was around about 2600 for many years. So he was born in 1969. So 2006, he would have been, how old would have Oleg been? He would have been in his 30s, right? He's now, he was born in 69, so he's 7 years older than me. So he'd be 54. He's now only rated 2470. The reason he's plummeted is because of the deflation within the rating systems, the supposed deflation that FIDE are now trying to fix. They're now changing, they're bumping up. Anyone below 2000 gets a bump in January. But Oleg made a post recently about how difficult it's become, you know, for professional players. And he mentioned there was some conversation he had where this guy was playing who didn't play a lot. And he was like 2600 or something. And somebody said something like, this guy wouldn't even have 2500 or wouldn't have, you know, if he played a lot. I think this guy was either 2600 or 2700, but he was like a fairly inactive player. So essentially what Oleg's saying is he's a fairly active player and he's been losing lots of points and he wants FIDE to fix it. On the other hand, you could say that there is also this argument that he's getting older, right? He's in his 50s, maybe slightly past his prime. Therefore his rating's gone down because of that as well. there is that argument. But I think Oleg is a good example of the kind of style. In his prime, he was winning a lot of tournaments in Spain. So I think he's a good example of the kind of style you need if you want to be a lucky player. You need to be active. You need to play a lot. You need to play in a risky style. You need to be an active player. You need to be quite, he's quite active, quite a good tactical player. Playing risky openings with white and with black. That is why he was winning a lot of open tournaments. So to win a lot of open tournaments, you need to be a lucky player, inverted commas. In a sense, you need to be willing to take risks. Now, he played this game. This game was played, I believe, in the Hastings Weekend Congress. I could have played that tournament because I stayed on after the Hastings main tournament. And both Oleg and Brandon played in the Hastings main tournament. Why didn't I play in the Weekender? Well, because I'm a wimp. Didn't want to play. I just was so tired after playing 9 games in a row. You don't get a rest day in tournaments anymore. The main Hastings tournament is 1 game a day. However, there's no rest day. I felt very tired. I didn't want to play the Weekender, so I didn't play. Right? I just bummed around, went to Bexhill. I even went to, is it Folkestone? It's quite nearby. Not Folkestone. What's the town that's quite near? Might start with a B, right? It's a place where a lot of old people go to die, apparently. And it's along the right. It's along the right. It's like Brighton's fairly near Hastings. I think Brighton's further on, but it's like it's all out in East Sussex. So somebody might be able to tell me in the chat. And I went there. I remember this old guy. I went there just to see what it was like. And I remember this old guy. It was on a Saturday, I think. Wanted a hand across the road. I gave him a hand across the road. He looked really old and it was quite sad that he couldn't get across the road properly. But anyway, that's enough babble. So Brandon was white. So this is an example where Brandon prepared well. I believe this was played on a Saturday night of the Weekend Congress. They both probably would have been on decent score. Maybe they were both on 3 out of 3 at this point. So you'd had the Friday night, you'd had the Saturday morning game. I believe there might have been 3 games on the Saturday. So it's either 2 or 3 games. But at this point they're either on 2 out of 2 or 3 out of 3. And they're playing each other. Possible that there was a draw offer from Oleg at some point. Or maybe, I don't think Brandon offered a draw in this game. He clearly set out his stall to try and win this game, and he managed to achieve it. Yeah, I like H4. H4 is a very good attacking move, very direct move, very clear what you're aiming, you're looking to achieve. I mean, could Black have maybe considered F6? It doesn't look like a terrible move, actually. That's the move that I would have strongly considered. I like to fight back. If somebody's strong on one side of the board, I like to fight back on that side of the board. If White takes, we could take with a knight, right? So it doesn't seem to like taking. So what other move could White play? Maybe H5, but H5 looks... yeah, no, H5 is the way. So maybe that is the way, as they say in the Mandalorian. Could I even take with a knight now? No, it doesn't like that move either. Maybe it likes Rook E5. Doesn't like that either. So I'm not quite sure what is the engine saying here. It's saying the best move is H6. Wow. This might well have been preparation by Brandon. And then Bishop D2. I mean, it's so hard to find this, right? Go H6 and then you calmly play Bishop D2 when Black's got all this huge centre now. So hard to play like this, so cold-blooded. Because a lot of players now would go, look, I'm a pawn down, let's get the pawn back. Right? Well, apparently that's not the best move. Because you take with the knight. And then here, this is actually very nice for Black because you go E5. And you are better as Black. You've got the centre. Your king's a little bit shaky, but you've got the centre. You've got the bishop pair. You've got good defensive moves coming like Queen E8. Very, very good for Black, right? Very nice. So I think that's possibly what, from practical level, that's what Oleg should have played. However, he played a5, which is not a bad move. Probably still in his preparation. Knight a4, another good move. Brandon's starting to get a nice position now. c4 was played. Yeah, bishop e7 looks like a good move. Oleg, I played him before. I don't think I've ever beaten him. I think we've had a few draws. He's a very good player. Very good all-round player, I would say. Very good dynamic player. Good positional player. Good tactical player. Just good chess player full stop, right? I believe he's from Ukraine originally. I'm not sure where he's based. I believe he lived in Spain for a number of years. But in this position, Black played d4 again, reasonable move. But Brandon's doing everything right. I mean, maybe I would have considered playing h5 here immediately. You don't need to go b3, but b3 is fairly sensible. Doesn't seem to like rook c8. So what is the best move here? Let's do the old game. You know, what's the best move? The best. Maybe bishop c6 is an option, right? That's a move I would have considered. f5, it loves fighting back on the king's side. So f5 and then take with the queen. It's quite tricky to handle these Taimanov kind of games, right? So all this is correct. Yeah, rook f7, you take with a knight. This is all normal. The queen e7 doesn't love. Maybe queen f8 was another option. No, but you've got to defend e6, right? So queen d7, not too bad. This is all good stuff. King h8, maybe not the best. Tricky position to handle, I would say, for black. You know, you've got this disjointed pawn structure. Wow, it thinks e5 is the best move. Such a tough move to find, right? Engines are just so good. I'll bow down to you. Clearly, you probably don't want to take the queen because you're going to run into a knight e4 and I'm going to grab the bishop there. Well, you could take the queen. Maybe not after knight e4. How do you even defend the bishop? You can't go to f4. So I guess you're taking with a rook, right? Now, what's the problem with rook takes, though? You know, I can't see a problem with it. So white seems to be better, but rook takes is a move. What's wrong with rook takes? There's nothing wrong with it, but you go wow, you go knight g4. That's absolutely insane. I mean, who the hell is finding this, right? Yeah. So, I mean, actually, the best move is not to take the pawn. You take here, and then you take. Although black's position is probably survivable. Very interesting position. It says after here, the best line is knight g4. If you take, I take, and you're in big trouble, because if you take here, I take on g4, and then I'm hitting it. This is the very typical engine stuff. So hard to see all this. And rook e2, knight e3. So you played a long tournament, and you're then playing this weekender, and you're expected to see all this. I mean, Brandon was an absolute maniac this whole week, because I remember I spent a bit of time with him that week, and I think a friend of ours, Ellie, was also around as well. And but Brandon was actually playing the morning events as well as playing the weekender. He also played the morning events, and he played the Masters. So he played the morning events, then he played the Masters in the afternoon, like everybody else. I mean, I was shattered just playing the Masters, so there's no way I would have played the morning events as well. It shows you the advantage of being a younger player, right? But knight g4, very nice tactics, and black would have been back in the game. You can't take the knight, you have to move the rook back. But then knight e3 does suppressor, and black is back in the game. But very tough position to play for black, I think. It's understandable black started to go wrong here. He didn't find e5, he went k8, not about knight a4, very smart move. Yeah, and that was actually quite a bad move as well. You had to find queen c7. It's already become quite tricky for black. Rook e5, top engine move, brilliant stuff. He took, yeah, knight e5. He's running into queen h7, mate. So you've got to do something about the mate. You can't, if you take on e5 with a bishop, queen f7. Rook e2. Very good game by Brandon, I felt. Bishop g6 though was actually better move. Taking was not the best, but still good. And now he allowed this bishop g6. And yeah, I felt like this was like probably one of the better games I've seen in British chess over the last year or so. You know, it's just like it shows Brandon's potential that he's a great player. And he cleaned up very nicely. You know, he's beaten like a seasoned pro, somebody I've never beaten. Somebody who's won a number of tournaments in Spain over the last 20 years. Won a number of tournaments everywhere, probably. Oleg has been one of the most successful Swiss players. But unfortunately, recently, Brandon said that he kind of slowing down on the whole playing front because he feels like it's a waste of time playing professional tournaments. It's very hard to get good conditions. I myself am struggling financially. My chessable courses have not sold well recently. I've not picked up enough coaching, both online and in person. I don't make enough money from chess. My salary current intake is very, very poor. So I'm thinking about going down a different route, maybe going back to college or going down some kind of educational route to get some other kind of degree. So I completely empathise with Brandon. I think he becomes a little bit frustrated by the fact that the conditions in English chess, for example, he played the British last year, he wasn't offered conditions despite the fact he would have been one of the high rated players. Some of the IMs were offered conditions. So it's a little bit hit and miss. I think there needs to be more consistency. And there is also the fact that the top players are obviously given very good conditions. But that's understandable in a way because, you know, they're the top players. You need to get to that level. If you get to 2600, 2650, and then you're not given conditions, or 2700, people like Adams have been 27. Adams has been 27.6. He's been one of the best players in the world. Before, he still is very good. Still is a very good player. So it's understandable people like that get given very good conditions. However, if you are looking at other players around your level who've got the same title as you and they're given conditions and you're not, or GMs who are lower rated than you are given conditions, or much lower rated, are given very good conditions to play in tournaments, and you're not given any conditions at all, it's understandable you then become frustrated with the whole professional chess thing, and you then want to go off and do something else, or you maybe want to focus on the coaching side, which is more lucrative than going down the playing side. So I completely sympathise with Brandon about the whole thing. I myself am becoming very frustrated with the whole chess malarkey, the lack of money in chess. It seems to be like a dog-eat-dog world, the chess world. You either make loads of money or you're basically penniless, and there seems to be no in between. You know, we see that with, say, the whole chess streaming circuit. There's a few streamers who make a fortune. There's a few YouTubers who make a fortune. But with a lot of other people, it's a struggle, like myself. So it's like, what's the point? You know, you can make more money doing other things. You can make more money probably working in McDonald's than you can as a professional chess player. Now, as I was saying before, it's understandable that the top players, you know, are treated well. The top players in England are treated well. Top players in the world are treated well. It's like other professions, which I would say are similar to chess, like, say, for example, tennis, golf. You know, at the top leagues, you're making very good money. However, go a little bit further down the ecosystem, and a lot of those people are not making much money at all. They're having to take on other jobs, either coaching jobs or normal day-to-day jobs. It's the same thing in the chess world. If you don't quite get to the top level, then it becomes a very hit and miss about whether you're going to get any money or not. So this is part of the problem. This is why a lot of people become frustrated. If you don't crack that 2650, 2700 level where you're getting the good conditions, you get in the hotels, you know, 2750, if you're 2800, let's say I was 2850 right now, I'd be getting similar conditions to Magnus. Well, I probably wouldn't be. They'd see me as like this Rouse's kind of figure. Yeah, but what is Gormali taking? How is he suddenly getting to 2850? This doesn't make sense. He was 2400 for years, and now he's 2850. Right, I probably wouldn't be offered the same conditions as Magnus. I'd be considered this kind of freak, this freak of the chess world that suddenly this aging GM gets 2850. The alarm bells would be ringing and be like, what is, Kramnik would be doing his investigations into Gormali. Forget about Nakamura for 1 second and be looking at Gormali. But yeah, this is what I'd need to get to a decent level to get good conditions. I feel like if you can't get to 2700 plus, it's actually not worth being a chess professional at all. But anyway, that's the end of my How to Be Lucky at Chess series. I hope you enjoyed it. So my conclusion about Brandon is that he's not a particularly lucky player. And the reason he's not a particularly lucky player is he doesn't need to be. But when he gets into a bad spot, as we saw in this Bischoff game, he's a tough cookie. He can survive better than most players. He's just generally a good player. A little bit like the guy he beat in the final game, which is Oleg. He's a good all-round player. He's well prepared. He's got a good classical basis in chess. He's just generally a good player. So that's my conclusion. I hope you enjoyed this series about how to be a lucky player. So just to summarise some of the things you need to be a lucky player. You need to take risks. You need to not take soft draws. Very important. You need to be willing to take risks occasionally. Not every single game, go gung-ho. But occasionally you need to kind of discern. You need to be rejecting soft draws. And these are some of the things you need to be a lucky player. You also need to be very level-headed, not to become perturbed when you get a bad position. You need to be willing to fight on. Brandon himself said, I remember there was a game at Hastings I played last year, and I drew with a low-rated player. And I could have played on, but I would have been clearly worse if I played on. Brandon said to me, you should have probably played on. You should take the risk against these kind of guys because most of the time you're going to come up trumps anyway, even from a bad position. I think that's absolutely a very good point. I think that's a point that is worth making, that, you might objectively look at a position and say that position's a bad position, but you also need to look at the opposition. That is why a lot of these lucky players are lucky players, because they're able to take that risk and gamble, and it comes off for them. Anyway, that's the end of the series. I hope you enjoyed it. My name's Danny Gormali. It's been great, and hopefully I can do more videos for my YouTube channel.